start the recording going. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are regular viewers to this podcast series of interviews, we've been doing composers and Major John Mott, but virtually every Salvation Army composer has said that the inspiration comes from multiple sources, but one in particular, that of the infamous Salvation Army Songbook. And bearing in mind that I've been a fan of the contents of the songbook for more years than I care to remember, and how it's fascinated me, the one person that I was privileged to meet many years ago is my dear friend Gordon Taylor, former member of the International Heritage Centre, now one of the Army's leading historians. His double biography of William Booth has smashed all people's expectations with the amount of history and heritage he's dug out, and continues to enthrall people about, is there anything left to discover about the early Salvation Army? Yes, there is. So I'd like to thank Gordon for coming in today and giving us his time, and just to trawl through what is probably the second book on most Salvationist shelves, the Songbook. A few years ago, Gordon, you done the companion to the Songbook.
Yes, the 1986 Songbook.
1986 Songbook. I do have the 53 companion somewhere by Gordon Avery, I think you said his name was.
Yes.
I picked up in a jumble sale at the training college, believe it or not.
Oh, yes.
So
well, it was one of the best-selling army books in its day. I mean, all corps officers had one on their shelves, and probably a lot of other Salvationists out of interest bought it. It was published, I think, that first companion in 1961, and it remained in print until virtually the publication of the next songbook in 86. So it's nearly a quarter of a century it was in circulation. And mine stayed in print, but I don't know how many copies SPNS sold latterly.
Well, it's an invigorating read, because as previous viewers and listeners will know, my home corps of Woodbridge suffered a problem with illness many years ago, so we lost our band and songsters very rapidly, and I was basically given the position of finding backing music and tracks and tunes for congregational singing. And the first problem I had was what existed and what didn't. I literally had to go song by song, tune by tune, and the godsend was the companion, so we could cross-reference and where did that come from and what's the song. Every Salvationist will know their favourite song and their favourite author, the ones they don't like, steer clear of that number. But the more I was drawn into it, it's fascinating that, as Bill Hines said in his interview, every song has a story, every message is behind it, and some of the most prolific songster pieces like Albert Osborne and Sidney Cox and Brownell Booth and Brindley Booth they litter our songbook, don't they, Gordon? It's just incredible. Yeah. The cacophony. It's a treasure chest of poetry and writing, isn't it?
Well, if you think of Albert Osborne, he was writing probably for publication for over 60 years. And between Albert Osborne, one poet general, and John Gowans, they just about covered the whole of the 20th century.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know whether there still is, but there was a recording, maybe Regal Xenophone still has it, hasn't looked lately, of Albert Osborne. I think it's just talking through his published songs in the I presume it would be the 33 Songbook. It may be the 56 one, I don't know. But
50.
Yeah, 53 Songbook. But the amount of detail he goes into and the stories behind some of them, and you're hearing them from the author about grief, about tragedy, and how, as a Christian, he recognized that we mustn't, the Lord is the ultimate savior, and to channel that into positivity. It's a wonderful listen. If anyone doesn't have that, if they want to, they can contact me in the usual ways, and I've got a copy, and I'll have a look and see if it's still online.
I think it is still on the Regal site.
Yeah. I'll have to I'll ask Stuart and see if it still is. If not, then it will be available from other sources. But one of the things I do remember is the fact that when I think you said that, you know, when you're looking into these songs and you're trying to learn the history and where did they come from, you had to bust a few myths about the fact that they would have sworn that Uncle Jack wrote a particular song or these verses, and you had to sort of let them down that that wasn't the truth and that it came from a completely different source.
Yes, well, there were a few in the 86 songbook that I had to change the attribution of the authorship from what they said in the 53 songbook, because you can't always even trust the author or the person who claims to be the author to get the facts right. If everybody wrote up the notes on their songs like Albert Osborne did, then writing a companion would be easy, but you just have to pull it together from different sources. But the best example currently of recent composers is the book by Howard Davis on his songs and music. I mean, published in Australia, but available from SBS. Yeah. And it covers all his songs, not only those in the songbook, which is just a handful, but all his songs to pieces and the circumstances in which he wrote them. That's a fascinating read in itself.
Yeah, I think it's really handy to have, you know, that first-hand knowledge. And when you were writing the 86 companion, how much of it, you know, because this was pre-internet and email age, so how difficult was it to try and, you know, when it wasn't immediately available, when it wasn't a Salvation Army composer that you knew of in America or in Norway or in, you know, in an army territory, you said, okay, he's in Oslo, he's in Australia, I'll send him a letter. For the ones that being, yeah, I will have to admit to this, that following your lead, we're both members of the Hymn Society, which has a great library and factotum of information. So how did you sort of set about tracing outside Christian authors that were not Salvationists and finding the stories out?
That wasn't always easy, but sometimes you could pick up a lead via the publishers of where their words had first appeared. And I think there probably weren't at that time as many living authors outside the army that we'd drawn upon. I mean, most of the living authors that I contacted were Salvationists, and perhaps just a handful outside the army, because there were only really a handful of living authors represented. I know one thing you were interested in was the proportion of songs by Salvationists, and in the 86 songbook, it was 40% written by Salvationists. That was up from 31% in 53. So the proportion of songs by Salvationists went up considerably in 86.
But that's interesting, because you would have thought that with an army songbook, and bearing in mind that the 53 one was in the golden age of people like Eric Ball and Ray Stedman Allen and Charles Skinner and the sort of tail end of Albert Osborne, where the songsters would try, you know, they'd have the song and then it would morph into congregational use, and that we were more familiar with the Salvationists, the Brindley Boons and so forth.
Yeah, well, I think it did even more so in the 86 songbook, because Brindley Boone was a member of that songbook council, Norman Bearcroft, and a number of Salvationist poets. I think Miriam Richards was on it. I wasn't, so I'm not sure exactly who was, just from memory, but they're certainly drawing a lot on songs that had come into use through the songsters. musical Salvationist gems for songsters.
Oh yes, the gems. I remember them. So
because very few Salvationist writers have actually written for congregational songs. I mean, there are a few by Albert Osborne who perhaps did more so than anybody else. And Catherine Baird, not so much. I think they really came via the songster music into congregational use rather than being written with congregations in mind.
yeah, I remember. I think we had when I watched a recording of the meeting by Garrett and Larson, and the chorus of "I want to say yes to the Lord of my life." And I'd been so used to singing that out of context that when I saw it it completely changed my view of the song. And it's not an affirmation; it's this young lad pleading, I want to say yes. And his family said, no, you've got to go into business. You've got to become the solicitor or whatever the character is. And I think we're so used to, he came to give us life. There's no other name but this name. How much more? We're used to John Gowans, the poet, with John Larson writing wonderful music, that I think some of us forget, particularly from my generation, who's not old enough to remember the late 60s and early 70s musicals, that, they were part of this epic type Jesus, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat type of show that could be put on in the smallest Salvation Army Hall and in the Royal Albert Hall.
Yes.
Yeah.
The musicals was another main source of new songs for the 86 songbook.
Yeah.
There was nothing of John Gowans in the 53 songbook, but he was just about the leading author amongst Salvationists in the 86 songbook.
I was actually interested because when I started doing my researches into the musicals, John Larson very kindly agreed to be my sort of factotum. So ask me anything, and if I know, I'll help. And I said, up until the 2015 songbook, I think it was Son of Man was the only Salvation Army musical that did not have a song taken out of it and published anywhere else. And that's now not the case. Everything from Takeover Bid to The Meeting had one song.
Yeah.
And I found that very interesting, that we mind Jesus Folk's Spirit, which is just full of wonderful lyrics. And we get so used to singing them as congregational songs, we forget there's a story.
Yes.
But I'm going to sort of show this slideshow that I put together just to give a brief history. For anyone who's read your companion, and most good Salvationists will have, and I forgot, you reminded me of the index of the sort of biography that's in the front of the history of
the background on the publishing history of the song.
And I was plaguing my friend Dawn over the weekend with my father, because as a fourth generation Salvationist, Dad before me collected all the songbooks, and all the members of the family had their own devotional songbook use. So we built up quite a collection. So I was used to having the 53 songbook and Happies and Harmony. And I did not realise, although Dad said it was, that we actually had a copy of the 1900 Salvation Army Songbook. And I didn't know that. That was just a book that was on the shelf. So for all of those who are patient listening, do not adjust your set while I alter the screen settings. And I'm just going to give a brief rundown using Gordon's excellent biographical guide as to the history of the songbook. Because when it started out, I think we were like on the revival songbook, and I think Booth sort of cobbled together from whatever sources were to hand. And when we started publishing our own books, it sort of turned into this. Now, hopefully this will work. We start off with a very wide collection of covers from across the years. Of course, we start off with the first one in 1900 with the 1905 tune book. Of course, we then move on to the 1930 edition. I was really surprised to find over 1,000 songs in that, with
Yeah,
with 700 odd choruses.
yeah.
What they did sing, and yet the 1928 tune book is an interesting thing. But of course, the 53 songbook came along, but it didn't have its own corresponding tune book, did it? It had a supplement edition.
Yes, when it was tied into the
Yeah.
and the supplement.
Managed to find a copy of the Young People's Songbook from 1963, and
Yeah.
my good friend Dawn equipped me with the corresponding second tune book supplement, which I didn't have, and I didn't know existed till a little while ago. But that sort of kept going on. I was sent a copy of Songs of Faith many years ago from the Canadian Territory, which was obviously a major part of Norman Beercroft's work over there, which led up to Keep Singing. I found your companion to the Keep Singing the other day, which I read, and I still learned a few things. And a lot of people remember the Keep Singing with its famous yellow cover. Of course, that led on to the one that I remember from my childhood, which is the infamous 1986 songbook with the 962 songs and choruses and the corresponding tune book. And I think for many Salvations, that's the one they remember. But of course, we also had the Sing for Joy, which I remember coming out because I was still in the YP. I still got my copy somewhere. And I remember going to the International Congress in 1990, and we picked up Happiness and Harmony and wondering what was happening. And then just a few years later, we had Magnify printed, which was an interesting combination. And then, of course, we had the 2015 Songbook brand new edition with all the songs, but no chorus section because they've all been integrated. And when I was doing my research, I found my dad's old 1945 chorus book, and for some reason, a copy of the USA National Youth Songbook from 1988. No idea why I've got that, but it's a welcome addition and some very interesting tunes. And thanks to Neil Silverberg, who provided me with a lot of Norwegian and Danish songbook covers and tune book covers from over the years. So it's really been a kaleidoscope of a collection, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So I mean, I know you've said that you're a songster leader, and I think you said the 53 songbook was the first songbook where authors were given a name, identified. Yeah. Do you know why that happened with the 53 one and why it wasn't in the 31? And
well, I think that the pattern with a lot of sort of revivalist songbooks was that they didn't put the authors' names in, and so nobody knew them. So even the most well-known hymns, that probably nobody knew actually who'd written them. So in the 30s, Arch Wiggins did a series for the Bandsman and Songster about the songs, about the authors of the songs in the 1930 book, and did a kind of serialized companion.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of them.
But as it was being published, so people would write in and say, I don't think that was right, or they'd offer bits of information that were helpful or not, as the case may be. I remember one funny story I heard about a song which they thought might have been written by Evangeline Booth. So they asked her whether she'd written it. And she said, well, I can't remember writing it, but if you want to attribute it to me, I don't mind.
Yeah, I was fascinated because I said to John Mott, I've just finished rereading, I think it's Peter Cook's book on Eric Ball, and he goes into some detail about streams in the desert and Eric's involvement with Evangeline and how she almost was terrified that she didn't think it was going to be good enough, and she knew Eric was that kind of a composer and would be able to do it justice. And we got songs of the Evangel and things like The World for God and these wonderful images. And she wasn't short of a few talents, was she, Evangeline?
No. And she, I think, relied on Eric Ball a lot to get that book into print.
Yes, not someone I ever had the privilege of meeting, Eric Ball, unfortunately.
Yeah, I did. And I played under his leadership. And one occasion when Croydon Band visited Poole, where he was living in retirement, and he conducted the band in the meditation, The Victory of Love, based on the song Love Stands the Test. If to mention it now, it's probably old, an old song to people, but it's one that I grew up on, and from the Gems for Six, I think, Gems for Songs for Six.
So, bearing in mind that, when you were asked to write the companion to the 86 Songbook, you obviously, were you aware, were you given Gordon Avery's notes, or were they just made available to you, or said, I know where they are, I can go and do it? I mean, what do you know about the genesis of that project?
Well, I had already been writing articles in The Musician. I did a series about the verses that had been left out of songs or had been heavily altered. It had the title Revisions and Excisions. And that ran in serial form in the Musician for years. And so I'd done lots of research on the songs in the 53 Songbook, and I was aware of Gordon Avery's book, having my own copy of it. But I also got to know Gordon Avery in his later years, when he lived in the retirement home of Gleeblands in South London. And I visited him in the home, and he showed me where he'd been given a cupboard where he could keep all his books. And he'd also got a bed with drawers underneath. And that was absolutely jammed full of all his books and papers as well.
Treasure trove!
So he had a tremendous amount of information, which he gathered together over many years. In addition to his published songbook companion, he'd done a serialized tune book companion in The Musician.
Yeah, okay.
And so he'd worked on both words and music, whereas the published companion was words only, as was mine. But he was pleased to know that somebody was coming along after him who would be able to carry on his research, in a sense. And so when he was promoted to glory, I got a phone call fairly soon after that saying, can you come and collect all his papers? He's bequeathed them to you.
Oh, lovely.
So my wife, who's the car driver in our house, took me down to the house to collect all these papers. And I was working at the Heritage Centre at the time, so some of them I took straight off to the Heritage Centre because we didn't have enough house room for them all. But so yes, that was a tremendous resource. But I decided that everything that I got, as far as possible, I would try and check the original sources. So if he said that a hymn by Charles Wesley was in Hymns and Sacred Poems of 1740, I mean, I would try and track that down in the British Library and make sure it actually was there, because you can't necessarily take it for granted that information secondhand is necessarily right. So I did a tremendous amount of research at the British Library for the 86 companion, and a tremendous amount of research at the Heritage Centre.
Yeah.
Because I found that a lot of songs that had come into the songbook had previously been published in Musical Salvationist and in the War Cry or the Officer magazine, in some cases the Young Soldier. So I went through absolutely every issue, but from the beginning to comb as much information out of it as I possibly could. And I discovered names of authors that nobody had ever heard of. And just to give one example that comes to mind, an old children's song called "Children Sing for Gladness, Tell the World in Song."
Yeah.
I found that appeared in The Young Soldier with the name of the author at the bottom. So that was the kind of information that only came about
Diligent research.
by a long trawl through issues year after year of the periodicals.
Yeah.
But that proved to be immensely valuable research in later years, because in the course of looking for songs, I saw lots of other things of interest, and when the occasion arose, I knew where to go back to find them.
Yeah. So it's just very interesting. I mean, I think I was really surprised. I don't know why, but I think it was Catherine Baird. And I was rereading your companion to the Keep Singing book to learn that she comes from Australia originally, where I always thought she was from sort of South London, Croydon area.
Yes.
I mean, I never knew that they'd never met her. So
she came to the UK via South Africa and the USA. She had appointments in both of those territories before she came to Britain. So yes, she was a global Salvationist, but and again was one of those early poets in my early years that I actually met.
Yeah, but I mean, who were were there any kind of people that you in your researches that proved helpful? I mean, I remember I can't think of the guy's name, but there was someone who done a complete spreadsheet of all the musical Salvationist titles with the authors. And he said up until his death, he said Brindley Boone was just this fount. I mean, he said he could instantly recall the most obscure writer from the 30s and the 40s and say, oh, we called him Uncle Sam, but he was the deputy songster leader at Harrogate Citadel. I said, was it that kind of thing where you had your opportunity to sort of phone up Ray Stedman Allen and Norman Beercroft and Brindley Boone and say, what do you know about this song? What do you know about this chorus? Can you shed any light on it?
Yes, I don't think that they were all that helpful in that kind of detail. Brindley was always interested in what I was doing, but of course he was a soldier at Croydon Citadel, as I have been since 1972. So I got to know him quite well at the core, and got information from him about his own songs, and perhaps through him got in touch with one or two of the other retired officers, songwriters, people like Ivy Morby and Miriam Richards and Ernest Rance.
Oh, there's a blast from the past. Quality songwriters.
There was another woman songwriter, Doris Rendell.
Oh, yes.
I knew through my parents, who worked on women's social work headquarters, and Doris Rendell was active at that time. And when she wrote her poems and songs, she often published a collection of them privately, and we got copies of some of them through that. So.
Yeah, I had a song on Sunday morning that the officer, when he sent through his list, and Salvation O the Joyful Sound, Lift Up the Banner on High. And I had an inkling about it, and I thought, this is a good old-fashioned Salvation Army song, nothing to do with the Army Book. Predates it by about 50 years. And yet you look at it, it almost as if they were kind of lift up the banner, the colour, will march beneath the colours. How could that not be around the yellow, red and blue flag? And yet, you look at the author, 1860 he died, 5 years before Booth thought of it.
Yes, yeah. Well, when I was thinking about what is an army song, I mean, most people would probably say that I'll Go in the Strength of the Lord is an army song. But the words are not.
Edward Turney, isn't it?
It's the words were written again before the army in Church of England hymn books, I think.
Edward, yeah, actually, I've got my memory because it's 734 in the 86 Songbook. So Edward Tunney. I mean, it brings up something that I was going to ask you about. That you get tunes. I mean, obviously now I'll go in the strength of the Lord. We all sing to the infamous Ivor Basanko version.
Yes.
Or 84, 85. You know, it was our Shepherd of Israel. So it would
Yeah.
go in the strength of the Lord. And
Yeah.
I remember it was With My Heart So Bright, My Soul Is Full of Joy, which Herbert Howard Booth, which we sing to Catlin. You know, but Phil Catlin was born way after Herbert Howard wrote the song, and I was desperately trying to find the tune that Herbert Howard had written the words in mind to, and it almost proved impossible. But I think the Heritage Centre found a rare copy of the War Cry, which had the staves written and said this is the tune that he had in mind to sing it to. Not Catlin at all.
Yes, but you could hardly get two more different tunes really to those words than the original ones, than Catlin's tune that most people later knew and assumed it was the original tune.
Yeah. I mean, I think the founder's quoted as saying he had a tune in Grimsby and he said, I'm going to call it Grimsby because that's where he heard it. And I'd love to know how many renamed tunes we have in the tune book, because we seem to have a habit of calling them obscure things.
Yes, yeah. I think hymn tune naming is something that's become more of an issue in recent years. And tunes, they may have had a title. The song may have had a title rather than a tune name. But there are a lot of tunes which other churches sing, but they call them different things from what we do.
My favorite example a couple of years ago was I was talking to a friend of mine from the local Catholic church, and I was lamenting the fact that in the army we associate "Oh Jesus, I Have Promised" with Aurelia. And I had a vicar friend of mine who said, you know what, Maureen? He said, yes, it goes to it. He said, I don't think I've ever sung that song to that tune. Outside of the army, it's a totally alien thing. You would not, I think Hyfridol or there's another tune I can't remember the name of, that they would sing it to the Church's One Foundation or something. You know, the idea of, yes, it will go, but I think we're the only ones that sing "Oh Jesus, I Have Promised" to Aurelia.
Well, that's one of our distinctives, that we've never matched words to tune in quite the same strict way as most other churches, where they say, well, what's the proper tune for whereas I think if it works, then use it. And so I give in lots of flexibility with choice of tunes, and different tunes for different moods.
Absolutely, and we can chop and change. I remember I emailed.
We always used to sing, for example, "He giveth more grace, our burdens grow greater," to the Ash Grove.
Yep.
And I remember being in my school choir when we were singing the Ash Grove as a secular song in a choir concert, and our conductor said, don't sing it like the Salvation Army sing it.
Ooh!
But
that's another one where you've got Rayston Allen, you write to
now, of course, Flatlands has pushed the Ash Grove off the park, hasn't it?
Yeah, I remember being at Butlins one year, and I said, can we sing "I'll Go in the Strength of the Lord," but can we sing it to "Thou Shepherd of Israel"? And I think Colonel David Hinton was leading. He said, you know what? He said, I cannot remember the last time I sang those words. Yeah, I grew up with it, because until the early 80s, when Ivor Basanko wrote the arrangement, it didn't exist.
Else. Yeah.
So, I mean, I know a little bit about this, but I know that you were you've said in your in the memoirs that you were drawn, you know, the 53 was the first one when the authors were given. But beyond this, you know, ability to go 721 is my favorite song because that was the one grandma always used to sing. I know where I got bitten by the bug, and I blame you for that wholeheartedly. So where did this interest for you begin in finding out about the stories behind the songs and the authors and that kind of thing, and the interest in hymnology and all that area? When did it begin for you?
I think for the 53 songbook, where they actually named the authors, at least you began to associate name with song. And one of the research projects that I did quite early on in the 70s was William Booth's Tune Book, one of the books you didn't have in your excellent overview. William Booth's Tune Book of 1876 called Revival Music.
I thought that got destroyed in the infamous IHQ bombing.
Well, I've got a copy of it. I inherited that from my grandparents. So I think that got me interested, and I researched as far as I possibly could the unnamed authors and composers of the songs in the revival music. So that was where I sort of cut my teeth on research into authors and composers. And then that was quickly followed up with the Companion to Keep Singing, which I did really as a fundraiser for Croydon Citadel. But,
oh, really?
We had a building project, and I thought, well, if I publish a few booklets which don't cost me too much to produce, then I can give the profits to the Corps. I don't know whether in the end there was much profit, but I certainly gave them some of the proceeds.
It's a lovely, I mean, I was talking to some friends who didn't even realise that existed, because, you know, Gordon Avery's edition in your subsequent book are just, you know, invaluable, and the stories and the locations behind it, you know, keep people guessing for years. And it's kind of, you go, oh, is that a songbook? I said, the only regret I have is there wasn't a companion to the chorus section, because that would have been invaluable.
Yes, yes. But I think the main thing against doing that at the time was simply the time it would have taken to research.
Yeah.
Because although the authors of the songs were named, the authors of the choruses weren't necessarily.
Unless you had the piano tune book.
So so I didn't really have time to research it then, but the fact that it's all come into one now means that I am researching a lot of choruses which originate from before the 53 book, but we're getting authors' biographies and notes on the songs which we haven't had before. I mean, that's been fascinating. And there's a chorus we sing to the tune of the Maple Leaf Forever.
Marching on, we're marching on.
Marching on, we're marching on, we're marching on together. Well, I found that was written, as you would expect, in Canada, written for an anniversary occasion in Canada in the 1890s by an officer called Thomas Adams, who was, he'd been in Scotland and he went to Canada as territorial commander. And then I think his health or his wife's health broke down and he resigned. And then he came back as a captain, sort of starting from the bottom up again. And quite soon after his return, he wrote this song with the chorus, we're marching on, we're marching on. And then when the, I think it would have been the 1904 Congress, had Canadian delegates, they brought the song with them and sang it at the Congress. And after that, it went round the world and was translated into various languages. I found one article where Railton said that he'd taken it to Java, and it was very difficult to translate into Japanese because the words, they didn't have words that were equivalent in meaning, so they had to do a sort of approximation. But it certainly got translated later on into Zulu and probably every other other language the army works in.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to think. I mean, I know when we went to America in the 1990 for the first time, I was surprised to learn that they had an American supplement to the 86 Songbook, and we were given a copy. And that was an interesting thing. I wondered how many variations of the songbook existed, because you would have had like Norwegian songs and Australian songs, and not everything managed to get clear of the international music department.
I think the USA was the only people that took the IHQ songbook and added their own supplement. Canada used the UK songbook, but the 86 American supplement, that was interesting in terms of the companion, because they also added notes in to the companion to their supplement.
Yeah.
I did think they might have had the courtesy of telling me, or even given me a chance to look them over, but because there were things that I didn't agree with. But fortunately, I don't think people would blame me too much for that.
I mean, you're the research. You can tell them what goes on and what doesn't. So, so when you were writing the 86 Songbook, I mean, I think the foreword by Colonel David Guy alludes to the fact that you will obviously find and correct information. But were you sort of surprised in your research is that any glaring omissions, or not necessarily mistakes, but a name came through and you said there's no logical reason why that name goes to that song other than it's printed on the same page? Because I think
that's right.
doxologies is...
There was one, yes. When the doxology of Praise God I'm Saved, they decided to attribute it to Captain Layton, because on the same page in the musical Salvationist, there was a song with words by him. But I think it's very unlikely that he ever had anything to do with Praise God I'm Saved. Somebody might prove me wrong. But.
Yeah, I'm always happy to be proved wrong, because it means I can correct my knowledge. I think
there was one song in the 53 songbook that was attributed to Lillian Watkins, who was a married woman officer, probably from the late 19th, early 20th century. And there was a song attributed to her. I did find it a bit of a surprise to discover that in the war cry, attributed to Colonel Pearson, William Pearson, at an age when Lillian Watkins would have been, I think, 7. I don't think she wrote it.
Yeah, I think
in style, it was classical William Pearson, and you couldn't see anybody else. And in it. But if you looked at any other songs, later songs by Lillian Watkins, they were nothing like that one. So I don't think that was by her. Another curious one that sort of it came to light in the 86 companion was the song "Make the World with Music Ring," which I think was attributed in the 86 songbook to Charles Collar.
I haven't got my thing on, so no, I can't see the number in this light.
But I found that looking through manuscript books of John Lawley, and found that that was in Lawley's manuscript books at a much earlier date than Charles Collar claimed to have written it. So again, somebody got their wires crossed there.
I think that, I mean, one of the things I remember asking you a while ago, and you gave me the information on a website, which I just sucked the juice out of, is someone who I think is very popular and well known to sort of the older generation, is Sidney Cox.
Yes,
A
yes.
very, very familiar name. Sadly, I'm told that there was a massive, he was persuaded to sign off his copyright before he died. So the army, he wanted the army to have the copyright, and it didn't happen. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I was really delighted that you sent me the link to the Gordon Cox website, and he's actually got recordings of Sydney, which was supposed to be a series. And one of the things I think a lot of people completely look over is the chorus "Deep and Wide," and it's turned into this action energy, deep and wide, deep and wide.
Yes.
And then you go back to the original word, and then nothing like that.
No, that's right. Yeah.
An intensely deep spiritual man. We talk about pathway of duty. I want to tell you what the Lord has done, because that to me is wonderful. And yet that's just the tip of the iceberg where Sidney Cox is concerned.
Yeah. And I think it used to be said that of Sidney Cox and Herbert Booth, that somewhere every Sunday one of their songs would be sung in the meetings somewhere around the army world. They were so central to our repertoire in the years that I was growing up, that if you didn't sing something by Sidney Cox, God's Love is Wonderful, or The Pathway of Duty, you'd certainly sing something of Herbert Booth, like Let Me Love Thee, or At the Cross Where I First Saw the Light. Yeah,
just a wonderful poet. And it was really interesting that to hear the voice even talking about the story of "You Can Tell Out the Sweet Story." And for those people that haven't, I'm not going to go into full details, but he tells the story of the fact, and you will know this better than I will, Gordon, that he was asked to do this kind of testimony session, and he said, I knew these people. These were people I grew up with. I lived next door to. He said, I knew they'd had blessings, and for some reason, something was holding them back from releasing this testimony. And he said, I just sat down and wrote it. He said, I'd never written anything before. And he said, you can tell out the sweet story. You, yes, you. They're all testimonies in themselves, aren't they?
Yes, yeah. And choruses were very much part of the testimony period in a lot of meetings when I was young. I don't know whether they still were for you or not.
I think the chorus section was very heavily used. I mean, I remember, of course, because we had my dear friend is still with us, and I'm really glad she is, Maureen Stutterford, who was, a veteran army, hadn't been through Bristol and Portsmouth with her family. So, I mean, although I don't think she would play ad lib, but she'd know the tunes to play. So if you said, can we sing so-and-so, she'd know where the words were and the music, or she could, make it up on the, to some extent, to pick the notes up on the piano. And she'd be able to, that goes like this, or that's a monitor arrangement of another chorus. And so, dear Mary Shepherd, who unfortunately went to be with the Lord a little while ago, her favourite chorus was "He's the Same Today as Yesterday, My Great Unchanging Friend." She knew the number, so whenever we came up to favourite choruses, can I have 163, please? And we knew instinctively what 163 in the chorus section was. So, those wonderful chorus section things where you'd say, can anyone tell me I love him better every day? What is the, what's the story behind that? But I remember a couple of years ago, we were both at a hymn society day in South London, I think. And I had my hands slapped during the previous Sunday meeting because we sang, teach me how to love thee, teach me how to pray, teach me how to serve thee better every day. And I was basically told, why did I change the words? And in my, I said, I hadn't. And I said, well, why is it not day by day? And I had to go back to the sources and ask my beloved mentor to say, am I wrong here? Have I got this wrong? No.
Yeah.
It's never been changed. It's been, for some reason, we've picked up this
Yeah.
different version.
Yes. While we're talking about choruses, there's an interesting one that, in my mind, now, and chorus, I believe God answers prayer. I believe God answers prayer, repeated 3 times. He's answered mine before. Well, in the tune book, they set it to a tune which I think is Meet in Bliss. La da 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 di di di.
Yeah.
La da 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 di 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 di. But I would never have sung that to that chorus, that tune. I always sang it to another tune, which was in the old tune book, which I think was "Oh, Remember Calvary." I believe God answers prayer. I believe God answers prayer. I believe God answers prayer. That's to me is the right tune for that chorus, but that's not the one that it's put to in the tune book.
I wouldn't. I'm thinking of I believe in the word of God, which is I believe in the word of God, which is a different one.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because the tune you just quoted, "Meet in Bliss," to change the subject completely, is the one that Norman Beercroft uses in To Regent's Fair.
Yes.
Meet in bliss, no tongue can tell. Meet in bliss, where the Saviour dwells. And when Norman was promoted to glory, everyone was going on about the fact that To Regent's Fair was his first march. And I was contacted by a friend of mine who went to Brightlingsea. And he said, I think you'll find that Brightlingsea is his first published march. And Stephen Carbon said, oh, it's his first. I said, Brightlingsea by Norman Beercroft with a lovely tune of Conference, which has vanished. And I remember having a very interesting conversation with Charles Craig, who was involved in doing some of the tune tidy-ups for the 87 tune book. Because he said Tim Allen, before he went to Australia, was trying to tidy up arrangement. He said Charles was given a whole load of tunes. He said, can you just sort of tidy these up? And he said one of them was either Covenant or Conference. He said, I think we kept Covenant and we lost Conference. And some of these tunes, you wonder where they come. I mean, I think it was Kingdom Triumphant. There's an Eric Ball piece, and the tune comes out of the tune book, and it's like, where the heck did he get that from? And would you ever understand the lyrics? And like, press home for God. And I can see a 1930s audience coming in from the march, coming in from the afternoon open air, following the band, and then going into the Salvation meeting. Stand like the brave, but you wouldn't you wouldn't get that sort of symbolism now, would you?
No.
Some of these things are very passé, but it doesn't stop them being, vastly interesting. But one of the things I would like to ask is that with the invention and the increased use in overheads and PowerPoint and that technology, the use of the songbook, in a Sunday worship has diminished to a certain. Not everyone has to have their own copy in front of them, although I've always said at Woodbridge, anyone who wants a copy is welcome to it. I remember when we got a projector, my co-officer said, can we use it for Sunday worship? Can you put the songbook on it? I went, yeah. I said, but I don't want everyone. She said, within 2 weeks, she stopped giving the numbers out. And then when I heard that we were going to get a new edition of the songbook for the 2015 Congress, I know there was a lot of people that said, why bother? The 86 songbook is still heavily used. You were on the Songbook Council, weren't you, for the 2015 Songbook?
Yeah.
So, what was that like to be asked to be? I mean, obviously you've done the research. You're the go-to man for the 86 Songbook. So you've got all this incredible research and knowledge that you've inherited, and that you've gone the extra mile. So when it was announced that this new songbook was going to come out, how did your involvement in that start?
Well, the general at the time was Shaw Clifton.
Yeah.
And Shaw and I are more or less the same sort of age. He's about a year older than me. And so when he was a younger officer, and I was at IHQ writing the companion to the 86 Songbook, which had just come out, we often used to have lunch and talk about the merits and the demerits of the 86 Songbook, because neither of us had actually been directly involved in its production, so we wouldn't necessarily have had the same shopping list as they came up with. But I never imagined that I'd ever get a chance to be involved in the next one. And probably Shaw didn't think that he would have a new songbook when he was general, but he obviously decided that it was an important thing for the Army internationally to have a book which embodied the songs reflecting our doctrines and our particular worship emphasis. And there were so many new songs that had been written in the army and outside, when there was a danger at one time that songs of fellowship and mission praise would completely push the Army Songbook out of the water. And there were some corps that were using either of those books and not using the Army Songbook at all, even if it was against the regulation at the time. But so really, I think Shaw felt that we ought to have a new songbook, and even if Salvationists didn't always use it in meetings to sing from, it would be a good devotional aid for them. And so he asked if the Songbook Council could work quickly so that he could sign off the contents of the book before he retired. That was really an almost impossible timetable for publishing a songbook, because it meant that we had to do our work very quickly. And we went through the songbook, just deciding what to omit before we had room for putting anything else in, and then did the same exercise with the suggested additions to see what we should put in. But some of the songs that were suggested, not everybody necessarily knew them even. So we were making decisions about songs that we'd never heard anybody sing, which really isn't the best way of doing it. When you can judge the poetry by what you see on the page, but you can't tell how well it will sing unless you've actually heard the tune and know how it goes.
Yeah, I was interested because when we were doing I was, Dad had the tune book in front of me, I had the songbook in front of me, and we came up with countless tunes and songs that I think Dad had probably in the 30 years, we may have only done half a dozen times. And that was the 86 songbook. I mean, we were at band practice, and the bandmaster brought out this hymn tune arrangement, and the original was by James McGranahan. And I said, I remember that the name of James McGranahan in the 86 was almost as prolific as Albert Osborne and Herbert Howard Booth. So it's interesting to why did we lose a chorus section?
Why did we lose the chorus section?
Why did we lose? Do you know why we lost the chorus section?
It was really because we couldn't really define a chorus any longer.
I love that.
There were songs that were just a single verse, or a single chorus, depending on how you described it. The new sort of contemporary style, particularly with the scripture songs, they were in the sort of intermediate area between song and chorus, and we couldn't decide what you would put into the chorus section and what you'd put into the song section. So we thought it really makes sense to have it all in together, so that songs on the same themes would be grouped together, whether they were one verse or multi-verses with their own chorus attached.
Yeah.
So that was the argument, really, that we couldn't any longer say what was a chorus.
Yeah. It's interesting. And also I like it because from a band point of view, you're not relying on the pianist having to fish out the piano tune book copy. If you want to sing a particular chorus and it's number 25 in the songbook, the band will have the music for it. And so you could actually have that sense of, if you've only got maybe a cornet, a euphonium and a trombone, and you're having to go, the music is available for it. And
well, I think I may have said sometime to you in the past, was one of my memories of going to army meetings at places like Westminster Central Hall, where they had the staff band on duty. In the days before there was the choruses in the tune book, that the staff band would actually accompany choruses by ear.
Yeah,
Bernard Adams,
I've never seen it.
Bernard Adams would just tell them the key and they would take it away. I don't know whether they ever rehearsed it, but they did it impeccably. And nobody would ever have known that they weren't playing from printed copy.
Yeah. I remember reading recently that there was a general who was doing a meeting somewhere, and they asked the band, could they ad-lib a chorus? And the bandmaster refused to. And he said, we don't ad-lib. He said, we rehearse, and there was quite this kind of entretien between the general and the bandmaster. Was permissible. But I remember reading it. A friend of mine had sent me a load of copies of The Musician, and there was occasionally articles where a particular bandmaster would say, this march you can use because it will have this chorus, like Montano has, I think, Travel Along in the Sunshine. So if you want the band to play it, use that march. And for many years the band march had a familiar chorus, and that's another story, because it means I'm then hunting things like Travel Along in the Sunshine, and there was I think Make Jesus King by Kenneth Downey, Singing We Go, Our Joy to Show. And
a lot of them are tucked away in the band pieces, provided you don't get carried away with the sort of repeats and the codas. And
I was lucky because my friend Trevor from Stone Market invited Ken Downey to come and do a weekend, and I said I'd love to meet him. He said, well, if you come across, I'll introduce you to him. And they were talking about things like a sunbeam and what some of his lovely works, his meditation and stuff. And I said, where does that chorus come from? Because I really like them. He said, it's a singing company piece by Brindley Boone in a YP Songs for Young People. And I got a copy of it, and it's just this one sheet on the back of a song sheet. And I mean, Ray Stephen said, I think there's a march by Brian Bowen, I think it's the Southern Cross, where the tune is actually written by Colonel Ostby, and it comes out of the Norwegian Songbook. You've got these hidden gems that you wouldn't know about.
Yes. When I was doing an exercise, I think it was early last year, I think, when we were in lockdown, or just before we went into lockdown, where I was trying to trace the secular songs that Albert Osborne wrote his songs to. A lot of them were written to secular tunes for holiness meetings at Clapton. And there was one that I just couldn't track down. It was said to be a Dutch tune, an old Dutch tune, but I couldn't find it anywhere. And all the resources of the internet, I couldn't track down a Dutch tune that this would have obviously fitted. So that was one that I had to admit defeat on.
Oh, join the club. I remember not too long ago, I think it was Let Us Go Out into the World with Love in Our Hearts by Derek Hartop.
Yes.
The last, I sort of tried to take up the mantle, and the last thing I can find is that he was doing something about justice for pensioners in the Isle of Man in 2008, and that's it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
no more, no more. It's just.
I don't know how he came to have that published by the army. Whether he offered it to the army, whether Ray Stedman did
according to the scripts, he was a friend of the army, but RSA did the arrangement for the songsters. So I presume it's something that he armyized.
Yes. On his website, which I couldn't find after later on, I went back and looked for the website. It just seemed to have disappeared, but
it's been archived.
It's somewhere there in the.
It's available. I was tipped off
to
the existence of an internet archival website, and for some reason it's in the archives. And
so you found it there.
I found a copy of it, but the all the emails are redundant. They all got bounced. So I did actually email the server company that the URL is registered to say this was registered to your company. Do you have any information on it? But not heard anything. So that's still one of those little rabbit hole tunnel things that I go down occasionally, which I find fascinating.
He's one of the authors that I haven't got much information on for the companion yet. So if anything else turns up, I'd be grateful for it.
Oh, I will share and share alike, because it's just someone, many of the people at Woolwich Call know that if I get bitten or they sort of say something about a song and where did it come from, I kind of remember having a conversation with a fairly new Salvationist friend of mine, and she seemed completely surprised that I looked at a thing like Climbing Up the Golden Stairs to Glory, and my dad would say, "Oh, the omnibus song." And like, well, why is that an omnibus song? Why'd you call it that? I said, well, it was written on an omnibus. And she didn't realize that there was a companion and that a lot of these things had stories behind it. And let's just get what's the Arthur Smith Arnott song? Because he was a biscuit man, wasn't he? So we always call it the biscuit song. And she kind of looks at me and her jaw drops. She said, "How can you just look at a song and know the biography and the DNA?" I said, "Trust me, I know nothing compared to some people." And I said, I vividly remember we came to Regent Hall for a concert, and halfway through, Dad elbowed me. He said, "Isn't that Gordon two in front?" And because your face had been in front of me, you turn. I said, "Hello, how you doing?" I said, "By the way, what do you know about so and so?" And immediately you said, "Oh, that was it's an Ira D. Sankey composition." I don't even know what the song was now, but a lot of people seem to, they overlook the wonderful treasure trove that is the Salvation Army Songbook and the beauties. And I'm really delighted. I mean, I know you've told me before, so I will ask in hesitation, how is the research going for the new companion? Because I know you've had your arm twisted after doing that epic tome on William Booth.
Yes.
To do the companion for the 2015 songbook. How is that going at the moment, or shouldn't I ask?
Yeah, well, it's going fairly well. I mean, I managed to get an editor assigned to the project quite early on, and he has been very helpful in contacting the living Salvationist authors to collect information from them in the same way as I did for the previous companion.
Yeah.
And I've been concentrating more on the non-army songs, which includes all this sort of contemporary songs of Graham Kendrick and
Tomlin and yeah. I remember reading that there's a very famous chorus that became very well known in sort of the late 90s, 2000s, and it remained anonymous. And it was a rumor that it was an Australian Salvation Army officer that had written it. And I think when it came in the 2015 songbook, the entire song was printed, and he kind of relented and said, "Yes, I'm happy to be associated with. Can't tell you for the life of me what the song is. It'll be a case of I look and find out what it is.
I think it's the song by Alan Lawrence.
Yeah.
And
Move Holy Spirit.
Sorry?
Move Holy Spirit.
Move Holy Spirit. That's the one. Yeah, but I mean that is an interesting story as to how that information came to light, because Howard Davis was the sort of go-between in that instance, unwittingly. He was Corps officer in Australia, and Alan Lawrence was a soldier at the Corps and attending the meetings when Howard Davis chose to use the chorus "Move Holy Spirit," which at that time had no verses. It was just a chorus.
Mm-hmm.
And after the meeting, Alan Lawrence said, I wrote that chorus. Did you know? And he didn't know. And so he said, Howard Davis said, well, if you could come up with some verses, I think that would help the song to become widely known.
Mm-hmm.
And so they worked together on verses and a melody for the verse, and so it was a sort of collaboration between Alan Lawrence and Howard Davis, which resulted in it being published in the Sing to the Lord.
Yeah.
And then into the 2015 songbook as a complete song, where it had only been in Happiness and Harmony as a chorus without an author's name attached.
Yeah. I mean, how often did it come across that you had an author who was happy for the words to be out there and to be used, but really sort of said, I want, just for God to use them, and I don't really want my name attached to them? Or was it a case of you had to, because of copyright and for music and all the rest of it, if someone was known to, Captain Fred Blogs from Taiwan had written a particular song, was it a case of you had to say, I'm sorry, Fred, but you may not want this to be associated because you just want it to be on its own merits? Did that kind of thing ever come up?
I think that certainly when I was young, choruses used to circulate without necessarily knowing where they'd come from and who'd written them or anything much about them. Excuse me, I'm just going to put the light on because I'm sitting in the shadow. No, well, it's not much better, but I'm.
Oh, that's fine. That's not a problem at all.
Yeah, I was aware that I was sort of receding into the. But yeah, officers leading the meetings used to come along with a little slip of paper, which they'd had typed out and cut up and circulated in the congregation to introduce a new chorus. Perhaps they accompanied it on their concertina, or somebody who could play by ear picked up the tune. But I think a lot of choruses circulated without people knowing where they'd come from and without an author's name attached.
Well, I remember I asked Mark Beercroft a while ago, because Norman doesn't state it in the score notes, where "I'm going to the army" comes from. And Mark said, as far as he was it Mark? Yeah, I think it was. Said, as far as I remember, his grandmother, Norman's mother, would just sing it around the house when he was being babysat as a child. He said, "I'm going to the army," and it's one of those melodies that everyone knows, but has been lost in the mists of time.
Yes, yeah.
So I'd dearly love to know where that comes from, because I think it's one of those that's just going to stay in relative obscurity.
Yes. Well, I know that Norman must have done some research on early day songs for the TV series Marching Us to War.
Yeah.
And I don't know where he found some of the songs that were set to secular tunes because they hadn't all been published in the musical Salvationist. But
Well,
they were,
he's a
they quite well,
South boy, isn't he? So I think he comes from Southall, so
Hmm.
he would definitely been in the heart of the music hall of London,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the people like Eric Ball and
Mhm.
and the one. I mean, Richard Slater didn't go till 1939, did he? So I mean, you had Bramwell Coles and Charles Skinner and who was the other one? Who preceded Coles in the music department?
Mm.
You had all those, great Victorian gentlemen who'd lived through the First World War. So they were very, walking through the East End of London, they would have heard of all these musical songs and choruses.
Yeah. And there were people like Colonel Goldsmith and
Yes.
Colonel Hawkes.
That was it.
That's what you're thinking of? Yeah.
So, I just wonder whether because I was fascinated by an interview with Mark Gatiss when he was talking about the modern day Sherlock Holmes, and everyone was going on about, hansom cabs and gas and smoke and Jack the Ripper. And he said, you take all that away, and Victorian London was a vibrant place. And he said, we're just covered in this ethos of hansom cabs and dashing through smoke and, evil lurking in the streets and prostitutes on every corner. And he said, that was, the stories of the atmosphere of the adaptations had almost overtaken the fact that, you'd walk down the street and you'd hear the songs and you'd have that kind of memorabilia. And I think it's Robert Sandall says in one of his books that when he was asked to do the history of the Salvation Army, he had to go to William Booth and say, well, where was the very first meeting held? Because it gets chopped and changed and talked about. And I mean, I remember when John Gowans retired, he had difficulty saying that my version of the story of the musicals was different to John Larson's recollection. He was sitting at the piano at the very first day, writing the very first song. So you've kind of got a folk memory, haven't you? So
well, that's right. I mean, people didn't necessarily document all the stories at the time. They were too busy getting on with the work, writing it, and in the case of the musicals, producing them at extremely short notice. And when they were rehearsing them as they came off the page, virtually, weren't they?
And bearing in mind that the War Cry would almost have a weekly new song by Albert Osborne or Bramwell Coles or Herbert Booth or something. So
yeah. It reminds me of the days when Les Condon was our bandmaster at Croydon Sydenham. And if he was writing a piece for us, we'd get a page or two at band practice, and then the next week we'd get a couple more pages. It was the only time that I knew that the part was actually written for me, because he knew the capabilities as players. And he wrote a part that it was within your capabilities. And
he was someone who, unfortunately, I never met. And
it's amazing to be at the centre of the creative process with that happening around us.
I remember talking to Dot and saying that he was one of those few composers. I think Bill Himes is a probably contemporary version where he could write for a mass orchestra or the Chicago Staff Band. He'd go and grab a cup of tea or coffee, come back, and then he'd be writing on the back of a notepad a duet for recorder music for his two children. And a completely different scenario, key, and it was just like clicking fingers.
Yes.
And Les Condon, it's not a secret to the listeners that Les Condon is my hero of army music, and because my bandmaster and him sort of grew up together in national service and in East Anglia when Les served at Hadley and so forth. So came out of Fakenham for his training, that they would bike ride and train journeys, and we'd get all this music. Who is this Les Condon? As he now he's dead. Is he? He's been dead a few years now. And then I got to know his family, and as Dot said, he just couldn't say no. He's one of those people who just had time for everyone, and
Yeah.
you know, just continues to be an inspiration. And John Watt said to me that when he was National Bandmaster, he had to organise the funeral procession for Les. He said all these bandsmen turned up. He said,
Yeah.
150 strong band. He said,
Didn't
Les
know how
never
it
have
was.
believed it.
Yeah.
But
It was right in the middle of winter too.
yes,
Yeah.
but he died Christmas, didn't he? So yeah, it was a tremendous shake. I'd love to go and find his grave one day and pay my respects. Talk about aside from the paperwork that you got from Gordon Avery and the research, who are the writers, the song authors that appeal to you as a Christian in your own right?
Which songs appealed to me particularly?
Yeah, which authors are the ones that kind of, if you had a few, if you had to pick out your favourites for a Desert Island Discs type thing,
Yes.
as of this morning when you woke up, kind of thing, because it changes every day.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I would have some favourites from every generation, but I think I liked some of Richard Slater's songs tremendously. I mean, one of his, which was probably the earliest song that I can remember making a sort of spiritual impression on me, was I have not much to give thee, Lord, for that great love which made thee mine. I haven't much to give thee, Lord, but all I have is thine. I think I was about 7 or 8 when I first heard that chorus. And having grown up in the army, I wasn't yet a junior soldier at that time, but it was learning that chorus was as much a sort of decision time in my life as anything I can remember, because it was so profound and simple but profound. And some of his other songs that we don't sing now, and I haven't sung for years, so they're receding into my memory. But songs like "None the love of Christ can measure, none steps can ever tell, none can estimate its treasure, held by those who with him dwell," and that I thought was so simple but profound. I think he had an instinct for knowing what songs the army needed, and he would write for the kind of resources that he thought most corps would be able to use. And I think he had a tremendous influence on the development of the music of the army. Albert Osborne's songs across the years, there are a number there that we worship thee, O crucified, yet once again by God's abundant mercy.
I think there was one he said about the song where he was invited to partake in a songwriting contest in the army papers. And he said
they hardly believed that he could have written it.
I thought for such a young man, that is a really heavy song. The past so idly linger, and he said they had to go through all the tune books and the songbooks to find it if I'd copied it, and they couldn't.
But in songs like "Except I am moved with compassion, how dwelleth thy spirit in me. I have no claim on grace, I have no right to plead." They're just such powerful songs which people don't write like that now.
What is it? The world is not my home. Is that an Osborne one or not? I don't. I want to say John Law.
Don't think so.
But written on a railway station in the middle of a hubble, because going from one end of the country to another, kind of thing.
Yes. No, I think that might have been Royalton, was it? No Home on Earth Am I? Is that the one?
It could, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. In the dim light of evening, I'm just, it's just what you mentioned.
Or are you thinking of Come In, My Lord, Come
God,
In?
Scott Railton.
Yes.
When the author was crossing the Mississippi and there's just no home on earth have I, you know.
Yeah, that's the one.
The
Yeah.
world is my home. It was yet again another pioneer. Yeah, I'm told there is there's a fairly new biography of Richard Slater out that's quite expensive, but
yes, it's quite a scholarly work, and it was a lot of interesting research went into it. It's by another Gordon Cox.
I'm thinking I may have to change my name to Gordon if I want to get these research. Everyone's called Gordon.
Yeah, that's an interesting book. I mean, it's not for sort of mass readership, I think, but when he uses scholarly terminology, but it's very thoroughly researched and very useful and interesting. Slater wrote a lot of diaries, kept a diary for years and years.
Oh, really?
The family have those diaries, and Gordon Cox managed to get privileged access to the diaries to research his book. I'd like to have seen them, but I think we got most of the information that we could for the companion, because Arch Wiggins, in his little biography of Father of Salvation Army Music, he quotes extracts from the diaries as well. So I think we got most of the useful information there.
So yeah, so it's something that I think everyone will have a favourite song, and I mean I remember people saying, you know, songs at their wedding. I think "God of the Open Spaces" or "God Is Strong" was dropped. How hard was it for the 2015 to stay doctrinally correct? Because the Salvation Army doctrines are very unique in substance, and I know I remember having a conversation with the Salvation Army. I cannot remember his name, and he was on the Songbook Council, and I think he was on the Doctrine Council. And I said, "Is there a rumor that there were songs that went into the Songbook that were not doctrinally correct?" And he said, "I doubt it." He said, "We were very keen that doctrine was kept to, but with all these contemporary Christian songs, came in. How hard was it to make sure that the belief structure of the army and the Songbook was as glued together as it had been, and that tradition kept, kind of good and proper, rather than taking to the extreme, oh, we can't do that because there's one line that doesn't agree."
Yeah, well, I'm sure that Shaw Clifton, with his theological background and his involvement in doctrine councils over the years, I think he had a personal interest in
Caddy, Lieutenant Colonel Ray Caddy.
Ray Caddy, yeah.
His son soldiers Ipswich Bramford Road, so I know the family well.
Yeah, but so Shaw Clifton would have had an influence on that. And he was very keen that the songbook had a good representation of holiness songs. And we didn't always use the criterion as whether it was still being sung, whether it should still be included. We included some for their theology because we thought they were important songs for a Salvation Army songbook, whether people sang them often or not. They were part of making the songbook a denominational statement. If you want to know the theology of the Salvation Army, apart from the doctrine book itself, go to the songbook. And I think that was something that we did aim at, to try and make it authentically a Salvation Army songbook that reflected the heritage of the army, as well as current practice.
So was there a danger that songs that would seem a bit tame now, and said, maybe in the 70s and 80s when army bands still to some extent marched down the street, you'd be singing Yellow Star and Red and Blue and We'll Keep the Old Flag Flying, and they're kind of, well, we don't do that anymore. Maybe the Household Troops Band does, or the ISB will play that at a Congress. I mean, I remember at the welcome to General Linda Bond, she got into a very playful argument with some senior commissioners because she said, I do hope the Founder's Song is retaining all 7 verses. None of this 4-verse lark Dean Goffin brought in. He said, well, I'm General, we sing 7.
Well, that was very much evident in the 2015 Congress, wasn't it? We several times went through all 7 verses at one meeting or another.
I do remember I was very privileged when we went to Butlins for New Horizons that my dear friend Major Cathy Wiles, Kath Dolling's daughter, was on the staff, and one of the absolute highlights is the fact that anyone on the camp can suggest a song for the evening wind up before the epilogue. And she said, if we done it, if we allowed to, he said, we would have to sing the Founder song every single night. And he said, you would get bored of that. He said, there was, of course, therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return. Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return, which no one knew before we went in about 2010. But that became the theme song. And she said, everyone's going to be la-la-ing this. By the time that we were going home singing it and introducing it to Woodbridge and Ipswich and Bramford Road. And I remember I said to Doc Condon one year, I said, can you bust a myth for me? I said, you've got access to your father's scores. I said, there is a very famous apocryphal story that she has almost busted for me. In the 1970s, the International Staff Band had to go to, and I'll say Bognor Regis because it's probably where it was, and a folder of music for the evening concert was accidentally left behind. And the bandmaster went a bit scatty. He said, we've left a hole in the meeting. And he said, this was before fax and email. And Les said, that's okay. He said, give me an hour or two. And he went back to his chalet and wrote a march out. And I've always been told that was Bognor Regis because the chorus was written for the home camp. And she said, it's very like Dad to do that. She said, and he probably did it. She said, but it wasn't Bognor Regis because the timings and the writing of it don't match up. And she kind of busted the myth, but it's one of those things where you ask somebody, you say, please tell me, how did this chorus come about? And people keep asking me, say, what do you know about so-and-so? I said, I've got a companion at home, I'll look it up, but if not, I know a man who does. And it's been something that has fascinated me since my early childhood. And when I sort of scratched the veneer of the songbook and found out what was in it and sort of demolished, and, I think this would have been half eaten given half the chance, that I think a lot of people take the songbook for granted. And I know there were some people who even questioned why we needed a 2015 edition. They said, well, we've got Songs of Fellowship and we've got Mission Praise. And I said, I was at a theatre show in London and my parents were on the same train as me. And I said, they went one way and Dad went and got a box full of 2015 songbooks and tune books. And I remember sitting on the train home going, this was the first time in my life to have a new Salvation Army song, because I remember the 86 songbook coming out, but not realizing the significance, because we just, we all know our favorite 734, I'll go in the strength of the Lord, 402, with my heart so bright in heaven. I've got to relearn all these numbers now. It's annoying. And my friend Leslie said to me on Sunday morning, I was asking her about tune book. She said, well, don't you know? I said, give me 5 years and I may know some of the tune numbers, but we've had 25, 30 years to learn all these numbers. We've got
I've never been one for knowing song numbers, and my companion didn't really help people to learn the numbers because it was done alphabetically, so you didn't need to know numbers.
So
I deliberately did that because I wanted people who didn't know the songbook to still be able to find the songs that I reference alphabetically. And then they'd find the number and look it up in the book. But I would like there to be the same excitement in the army for the songbook as there was in my earlier years, when a new songbook was quite an event for a corps, and people would look at it and see, well, what's new? What can we sing now? But people have got so used to there being such a vast resource to draw on that it's not the event that it might be.
Yeah, I mean,
I think one of the reasons why I agreed to do the companion was because I thought it might just help to give the song an added push if we give the people information about where the songs came from, and information they wouldn't otherwise be able to find very easily.
No, I think one of the most famous ones is Bill Hymes's "All That I Am."
Yes,
I remember we were in America 1992, and we were guests of some friends of ours in Chicago, and they said, we're going to go to the big Chicago Corps for Sunday worship. And Bill Hymes was the Sergeant Major. And I only knew him from a very obscure, very small piece of music called Leaning, which I discussed at length. I said, we'd only just played that. So the name of Bill Hymes, then we learned All That I Am, All I Can Be, and the story behind it. And I think people just sing it and think it's a very lovely song. And they don't realize the heart-wrenching story that caused that, the fruits of that story for that song.
Yeah.
And it's just a wonderful thing to have. I mean, I was personally delighted that the Chris Mallett version of "To God Be the Glory" made the new songbook, because I've been singing that for years. And we sang. I was asked to sing, choose a song for Sunday morning, and I said, well, it's got to be "To God Be the Glory" because it's now in the tune book. So, "To God be the glory, great things He have done." Beautiful, beautiful song, and just a simple little arrangement that's 35 years old now, 1988.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, Mallett's no longer with us, so we have to.
Songs can very quickly become dated, can't they? That something that you think of as a new song, when you look at the date on it, it's actually a generation ago. 40 years.
I was listening to a radio interview, and they used the same arrangement, and we had a lovely lady, Tracy was her name, and she was a new Salvationist many years ago, came to Woodbridge and brought her family with her, and she was very keen to go on one of these women away weekends at Sunbury Court or Swanwick or wherever, and she came back and she said, I've learnt this fantastic new army song. It's brilliant. I've got all the words, I've got the music. It was "Send the Fire."
Oh, yes.
And we were going, oh, God. I said, do you mean "Now Christ the burning cleansing"? And she said, what the heck are you? I said, that was written by William Booth. And Pam Rhodes actually used it on one of her radio shows. And I'd written in and saying, can I have "To God Be the Glory"? Because we always hear the Fanny Crosby original. You were present at Butlins when we sang the army version, because the Songs of Praise recording is online. And she said, I remember it well. I remember singing it, and I've got a version. And so she said, there's a recording that I've got of her singing "Oh God of Burning Cleansing." She said, I don't actually know whether that's the version that the General William Booth. I want to know it was a completely different version. And we sort of sang it to a different one. But I think Norman Beercroft says, for most Salvationists, the tune of Tucker is, it is the proper tune to that song. And I have incessant arguments about, well, who says what the proper tune is? The tune is whatever you learned at your mother's side in primary and Sunday school. Jesus loves me, this I know. I always think the Bows. Jesus loves me, because that's the one I learned in Sing Company.
Yes.
I have immense trouble sometimes when I get sent through a list of the songs, and he says, can we sing it? And I remember Jesus the name high over all came up one week, and I instantly went, Jesus the name high over all.
Yeah.
And completely forgot it goes to a completely different tune in the songbook. When my dad played it, I was like, what are you playing? He said, but that's, it was a song, so I'd been immersed in it. But anyway, time has got, I know I've got to move on, and I could have, I know we could have talked for hours and it would have been an absolute pleasure, but I think we have to draw the line somewhere. So, as always, when I have the pleasure of your company, it is riveting, and your knowledge is just as tickety-boo as it has ever been, based on your immense research and your knowledge and these people that you've interacted, and Gordon Avery's magnificent treasure trove. Gordon, thank you so much for your time and for being willing to just come on board. And we talk about the songbook, and we talk about tunes and favourite songs, but to talk about the songbook and these authors that are part of our history and heritage is very important. And I just want to say thank you very much for being willing just to dig in your memory for these events, and Albert Osborne, Herbert Booth and Richard Slater, that these songs will not be forgotten by generations to come. And
well, when all sorts of thoughts go through your mind when you're having a conversation like this, and when you could go off at all sorts of different tangents, and but I hope it's been some interest and some fascination.
Well, it always has to be, because it's the songbook is a particular specialty of mine. But having had the pleasure of meeting you several times over the years, you know, you've passed on this bug for interest, which I'm truly grateful, because it's something that I always find interesting. And I have to sort of step back and remember that not everyone has the same kind of passion that I do for the songbook and its interest and its treasure.
Yeah. But when you think about how central singing in meetings is to the Salvation Army's identity, and how can you not love the songbook? I love the songs and what they speak to us of the gospel and the message of salvation and holiness and Christ-likeness. And the songs say it all, don't they? I mean, they're full of scripture, and they're so memorable. And I hope there's the encouragement to people to dig deeper and reach further and get really inside the songs.
And until the new edition is published, some people may not realise, but if they want to avail themselves of the CD-ROM songbook for the 2015 edition, most of your 1986 supplementary notes are available.
That's right, they are, yeah.
So, you know, if they can't, if they can't find the actual book themselves, which is still available, you know, an essential read for anyone who's interested in the behind the scenes. The notes are available on there if you can get it to work, because there have been some bugs which I've managed to have some help with. But I'll pull this chat to a close, because I've got time has beaten us, as I knew it would. But I will just pray for you and your family and your situations at the moment with your researchers, and then I'll just bring this to an end. So, you know, however, you know, if you want to walk around the room or just, you know, twiddle your fingers, whatever seems comfortable. But I always like to end these chats with a prayer, and just to dedicate it to God. So, dear Lord, it's been an absolute privilege and pleasure to talk to Gordon again, someone who I've had the privilege of knowing for many years, and is just an esteemed historian, and his love and passion for all things songbook and music just shines through. I cheerfully admit he's my mentor and guide in many things, and a very self-effacing, self-deprecating gentleman. And we thank you, Lord, for the time he's taken and the roles in the cause he served at, and his service with them, and with the Heritage Department, and just communicating with friends and Salvationists the world over to try and set these things on record, and to try and make sure that, although mistakes will happen, Lord, that, you know, he will do his best to make sure that the truth for the songs is known, and that the truth of Jesus Christ is known. I'm very much aware that he's, you know, he's just finished this humongous project on William Booth, and that has taken a lot of time and effort, and particularly in this COVID age when everything seems to be tucked away in a digital archive somewhere. But we thank you, Lord, for his passion. I thank you, Lord, for his Christianity, his love for you. I pray for him and his family who support him and encourage him. And, you know, when he hits that proverbial brick wall, that they're there to guide him through. For the Salvation Army cause and the people that he's connected with, and for the connections he has around the world to support him, I just thank him for that. I thank him for his friendship. I thank him for his willingness to dig out the old books and just to help me in my own personal researches and that. He's always willing to help people who just want to explore a little bit further. But just now, Lord, I just ask your blessing and your peace on him now and his family as he continues to live his life and to serve you as best he can. And I just ask your blessing on him now, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Oh.
I will